talk of the week of whatever day it is. There seems to be some confusion as to what day it is. I've been getting that question a lot today. Today is Saturday. Tomorrow is Sunday. You all should have picked up your manuscripts for tomorrow, which is Sunday, right? And thank you for that. Those of you in workshop number 7, I think you've been informed that Peter Orner is still on his way, but delayed. Right, but he will get here, right? And we will welcome him with joy. But it means that you'll be reading some people tomorrow that were scheduled for the previous day. And I like the confidence on your face, sir. Everyone in your workshop knows that, right? Yes, okay. Moving on. Questions about the tap water. Can you drink it? Yes, you can. Okay, it's good tap water. It's fine. You can buy water if you wish, but you can also drink, Northern California Tahoe tap water. I encourage that. The bookstore is open, and they encourage you to visit. It's right over there. It's on the behind the stage. And we encourage you to pick up a copy of the Daily Moo, which will give you more information about comings and goings and things that await you. If you have any news items for the Daily Moo, send them my way, and I'll see what I can do with them. And right now, Michael Spurgeon.
Howdy. So I'm here to introduce Francisco Goldman. Francisco Goldman is one of the foremost novelists and literary journalists writing in the Americas today. Born in Boston to a Guatemalan mother and a Jewish-American father, his work bridges the United States, Mexico, and Central America, exploring questions of identity, history, political violence, love, memory, exile, and belonging with extraordinary moral and artistic depth. His books have been translated into 16 languages, and his list of awards is longer than I'm going to recite here. But it does include a Borchard Foundation Center on Literary Arts Fellowship, which is why I have been asked to introduce him. Goldman's works of fiction include The Long Night of White Chickens, which is a coming-of-age mystery set between Boston and Guatemala that explores identity, memory, and lingering effects of political violence. The Ordinary Seaman, The Divine Husband, Monkey Boy, which was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction and a recipient of American Book Award. Monkey Boy is an intimate and often deeply humorous exploration of family, mixed heritage, and the search for identity. I'll come back to one other fiction book. Frank's nonfiction includes The Art of Political Murder, Who Killed the Bishop, a landmark work of investigative journalism reconstructing the assassination of Guatemalan Bishop Juan Gerardi and its broader implications for truth and justice in post-war Guatemala. His other book-length worth of nonfiction, and I don't think I've missed any others, is The Interior Circuit, a Mexico City Chronicle, awarded the Blue Metropolis Premio Azul, a vibrant portrait of contemporary Mexico City that blends memoir, reportage, cultural criticism, and political reflection. His fourth novel is is related to a topic that brought me in connection with Frank. His fourth novel is a book called Say Her Name, which is about his love affair with his second wife, Aura Estrada, and her premature accidental death on the beaches of Oaxaca. And the way I got introduced, and it's a really deeply moving book about love and loss and the grief that follows that loss. It's really heartbreaking. There were many moments when I was reading that book and I had to sort of just put it down and stare off into space. But in the wake of Aura's death, and Aura was a young Mexican writer, Frank and some of Aura's friends put together a prize called the Aura Estrada Prize, which gives a fairly large grant to a writer, a female writer in Latin America, writing in well, really any of the Americas, writing in Spanish or one of the indigenous or original languages from Mexico. And it is the only prize of its kind in the Western Hemisphere. And if you are familiar with the profound violence that has been perpetuated against women, across the world, but really in Mexico and in Latin America, and if you are aware of how women have not had space to have their voices heard, you can understand just how profound this prize is. And there was a lot of backlash when the prize was created because it wasn't, men couldn't win it. And it's a fair amount of money. And in fact, it's now more money. That prize has been given out 9 times, and it's now under the auspices of the Albert and Elaine Borchard Foundation Center on Literary Arts. It didn't start out that way. It was independent for the first 7 times the prize was awarded, but now it has a permanent home with us. And it's in that relationship that I've gotten to know Frank. And there's no question that his work as a literary artist is significant. However, I do have a suspicion that the legacy of this prize will in some ways be his greatest work, because it has created a rippling effect that lifts up marginalized voices of young women across Latin America. And I've had the privilege to have met some of those young women, and they're extraordinary writers. And I know he's going to be on a panel later talking about women and the movements of Latin American literature in today. And I have gotten to know Mexican contemporary literature, and one of the truly profound things that's happening in the post-boom cycle that is currently going on is that women like Valeria Luiselli and Guadalupe Nettel and Gabriela Warregui and Brenda Lozano, and the list goes on, are reshaping Mexican literature in a truly profound way. And so, I'm proud to know Frank for a lot of reasons, but I'm deeply moved to be able to work with him on the Aura Estrada Prize. Please welcome my friend, Frank.
Thanks, Michael, so much. You've been a great friend, and the Borchardt, thank you so much. About the prize, yeah, I think the prize really came about, I think, because Aura's friends wanted to give me something to do. In those days, I was pretty lost. And we were so fortunate to have an incredible fundraising event in New York City with people like Salman Rushdie and Peter Carey and Colin McCallum, people who had been her creative writing teachers at Hunter, as well as friends of ours. We raised $80,000 in one night. And later, soon after it, found out that it happened just a few weeks before that guy with the what's it called, the scheme that ripped everybody off, the Ponzi scheme that ripped everybody off, Madoff. That many of the people who'd given us money had lost a fortune in the Madoff schemes. So if we hadn't had our fundraiser that night, we wouldn't have raised that money. We'd waited just a few weeks later. And that money lasted us until, as he said, the prize is given every 2 years, and we gave it, I think, 7 or 8 times. And we were ready to say, okay, that's been a good run, we're out of money. And we're really proud of what we did. But then this incredible angel savior came to us. And I'm just so proud of what we've done with the prize, and to know that, when hopefully, it will outlast me and us, and it's really, and I think my co-directors are, along with the Borchardt Foundation and the people at Almadia, the publishers, Gabriela Howdige, and someone I think a lot of you know because she's been here, Brenda Lozano, who ran the prize with me. All right, I don't know how I got into this. I thought everyone was giving a craft talk, and I said, okay, I'll give a craft talk, but I've been working on it the last few days, and it's probably going to be a little long, and I'll try. I don't know. I'll just jump in. I impulsively offered to give this craft talk in a moment of inspiration after reading Zadie Smith's essay, Fascinated to Presume, in defense of fiction. An essay that I felt as if I'd been waiting to read, and in that in some vague way I aspired to write myself, though I could never do so as brilliantly and beautifully as Zadie Smith has. In this essay, Smith has implicitly hard things about a supposed literary culture that tries to impose such harsh, at times tyrannical restraints on writers, and that often enough will harmfully criticize and troll them for not obeying. These critics seeming to speak for a writing and reading culture that, Smith argues, has forgotten what a novel, what fiction has always been, and that some still presume it to be. But she expresses this in the most eloquent, gentle but firm, winning of ways. Read the essay if you haven't yet. Really, if you haven't, I bet you'd be happy if I read it out loud to you now. And maybe you'd even feel helped by it, as even a longtime veteran of some of these cultural and literary wars, like myself, felt helped by it. But I don't think I'd get paid if I did that. So, but it's really an incredible essay. You need to read it if you haven't. In the essay's perhaps most emblematic paragraph, Smith writes, "Re-examine all you have been told," Walt Whitman tells us, "and dismiss whatever insults your own soul." Full disclosure, she writes, what insults my soul is the idea, popular in the culture just now, and presented in widely variant degrees of complexity, that we can and should write only about people who are fundamentally like us, racially, sexually, genetically, nationally, politically, personally. That only an intimate authorial autobiographical connection with a character can be the rightful basis of a fiction. I do not believe that. I could not have written a single one of my books if I did. Earlier in the essay, she writes, "I've always been aware of being an inconsistent personality, of having a lot of contradictory voices knocking around my head. As a kid, I was ashamed of it. Other people seemed to feel strongly about themselves, to know exactly who they were. I was never like that." And later in the paragraph, "I rarely entered a friend's home without wondering what it might be like to never leave. That is, what it would like to be Polish or Ghanaian or Irish or Bengali, be richer or poorer, to say these prayers or hold those politics. I was an equal opportunity voyeur. I wanted to know what it was like to be everybody. Above all, I wondered what it would be like to believe the sorts of things I didn't believe. And what I did in life, I did with books. I lived in them and felt them live in me. I felt I was Jane Eyre and Seeley and Mr. Biswas and David Copperfield." I almost get choked up every time I even pronounce the name Mr. Biswas, because I love that book so much. I would have imagined that everyone who aspires to write fictional stories started out more or less that way, with a love of where reading could take you, especially into the lives of characters living in distant times and places, or contemporary ones, and as utterly unlike you as Jane Eyre is for myself. Zadie Smith's background, like my own, is racially and nationally mixed. Her father, of course, was white, working-class British, and her mother was born in Jamaica, England, Jamaica, the United States. She has at least 3 places she calls home. My father comes from a Ukrainian family that immigrated to the U.S. His father, a socialist, secular Jewish baker. Goldman was a name given to him by U.S. immigration authorities to replace, supposedly, Malamudovich. My mother is from Guatemala, and it would be impossible for me to say where her family heritage lines begin. For many years, her grandmother's identity was a hidden secret, though I eventually found out her name was Francisca Garcia, and that she was a young black woman who died giving birth to my great-aunt Nano. My mother's other grandmother's identity is a complete mystery, a now forgotten family secret. But my grandfather, my mother's father, Francisco Molina, was a so-called illegitimate child, un hijo natural in the euphemisms of the time, as if fathered by the rainforest, or a mountain, or in a brothel. Anyway, clearly mestizo. His father supposedly a Guatemalan colonel who none of us know anything about. Francisca Garcia's spouse, my mother's known grandfather, was Luis Hernandez, a heavily indigenous mestizo, barely mestizo. Perhaps in the photo I have of him, he looks as if he could be fully indigenous, though he, an outlaw cattle rustler who became a legitimate cattle rancher, lived as what Guatemalans call a Ladino, that is, outside the traditional ways of the pueblos originarios. What in Mexico, where I live now with my what in Mexico people just call Mexican. My life has been split between the U.S., Guatemala, and Mexico, where I live now with my family. All three are my homes. I think, certainly growing up in a country as obsessed with racial identity as the U.S. is, that we mixed-race children do grow up with a sense of not fitting in, of not knowing where or even if we belong. Like Zadie Smith, I also was obsessed with the households and families of friends of different backgrounds in my largely working-class Irish and Italian hometown. To this day, I feel like I know the insides of a typical Irish household better than I do an American Jewish one. Of course, all kinds of young people, whatever their racial background, often struggle to understand or to grow into or to find, make, or invent an identity that feels like their own. Maybe that work never stops. I think most of us have a voice inside that we regard as our most intimate known voice, the essential self that is always with us, and that is in some ways remarkably unchanging, as much as it might still struggle to keep up with or adapt to the changes life inflicts on it. Young, middle-aged, old, from childhood or into adulthood, happily single, miserably single, married, widowed, married, at last a father, and someone who feels good about their work, someone confident and brave, someone fearful and stressed all the time, and so on. One thing mixed-race people probably know better than others is that identity, especially racial or ethnic identity, can be porous and seem so much a construct of other people and of society, and even at times so fragilely or embarrassingly contrived or artificial that it can be shocking over and over again that people take it so seriously and are willing to cause so much harm, commit so much violence on account of it. Mixed race people know we are not split down the middle, one side of us being all the time one thing, the other side the other. And we know that the common insistence on categorizing people as one thing or the other is ludicrous and often utterly mangling. My favorite writer, who I think of as a mentor in these personal matters as well as in the practice and art of writing, is Natalia Ginzburg, who grew up in fascist Italy in a half-Jewish, half-Catholic family, during her school years wishing she could be only a Catholic girl just so that she could feel normal. She maintained that a mixed heritage person is not partly one thing or another, but is 100% both. 100% both at once, and 100% one or the other, sometimes depending on the circumstances. For instance, you might never feel particularly Jewish in your day-to-day life, especially if you've grown up and lived most of your life in Catholic households, until violent anti-Semitism enters your environment. And then you feel fearful, as if it really is a blood inheritance, fearful for yourself and fearful and angry for your family. It can be complex to process, and this isn't the place to get into these complexities. But as a moral ideal, I embrace Natalia Ginzburg's conviction on this, and I'm fascinated by the way a novel like her great All Our Yesterdays exemplifies it. Her father was a secular Jew like mine was, but she was more lastingly and lovingly and admiring her father than I frankly was of mine. My parents had a very troubled marriage and eventually split up. Natalia Ginzburg was married to a heroic Jewish intellectual and member of the resistance who was tortured to death by the Nazis, leaving her to raise 3 children on her own. She later converted to Catholicism, and it was as a practicing Catholic that she wrote that she was both 100% Jewish Italian and 100% Catholic Italian. When writing fiction, aren't you, or why can't you be 100% the character you are writing about? At least while you are writing about that character, inhabiting her in your imagination with the same conviction with which you've inhabited characters as you read. In her essay, Zadie Smith wrote, "What would our debates about fiction look like, I sometimes wonder, if our preferred verbal container for the phenomena of writing about others was not cultural appropriation, but rather interpersonal voyeurism, or profound other fascination, or even cross-epidermal reanimation. Our discussions would still be vibrant, perhaps even still furious, but I'm certain they would not be the same. Profound other fascination, profound other admiration, sorrow for, awe of, riveted by, haunted by the witnessed suffering of, which you may have felt even as a U.S. taxpayer, complicit in, and dogged by the question of what you owe those others whose suffering has so marked your own sense of self and life. The sense that one cannot really understand one's own experience without understanding theirs, or one cannot understand your own community and your place in it without understanding their place in it too. A journalist, an anthropologist, a psychologist, or whatever might have one way of getting to know or perhaps understanding or describing or at least pretending to know this so-called other as a people or as a person, and the fiction writer has another, which is to imagine himself, herself, as a person or as some people from that community. Now that is not the same as claiming a verifiable knowledge of that person, or being able to somehow pass through their epidermis and penetrate the labyrinths of their brain and emotions and nervous systems and hear that private, eternal, only theirs voice as intimately as they do. Of course it doesn't mean that. With words on paper, with our imaginations, with our empathy, with whatever experience and learned knowledge we can bring to our creation, we only need to create a lively enough fictional character that a reader, not every reader, will find convincingly alive and want to keep reading about. It doesn't need to be every reader, as Smith stresses. Maybe it only needs to be the readers, or some of the readers, who still presume to believe in fiction. In just a moment, I'll get specific here about the novel I'm working on now. At first, I want to say that I've written books in which most, in one case even all, of the characters came directly from my own life, and novels in which none, not even one of them did. I have never had any rule about this. I feel the debates either for or against so-called autofiction incredibly exasperating. You shouldn't write this, you shouldn't write that. I've never liked anyone telling me what I can or can't do. Also, as many have pointed out, what in the US nowadays we call autofiction usually refers to what before we simply called the autobiographical novel. In France, where autofiction came from, it emerged from the Oulipo aesthetics of rigorous self-imposed creative restraints. And in autofiction, the task is to give a novelistic shape to your own experience, but it is forbidden to make up anything. That's the true autofiction. Writers should be inspired to write fiction by whatever it is they think or feel they need to write about. And the form that novel takes can be inspired by their obsession, or rather, their obsession should lead them to that form. My first 3 novels were at least partly inspired by my love of certain contradictory literary genres and traditions. The Latin American boom novels, those history and politics engaged in so-called totalizing novels, often seemingly narrated by entire communities, but also the I-driven American narratives of Salinger, Bellow, Ellison, Roth, and also the voice-driven genius of V.S. Naipaul's A House for Mr. Biswas, and the darker A Bend in the River. Back then, the decision I made coming out of college to bring my 2 sides together through coming out of college was to bring my 2 sides together through lived experience by going to live and work in the Central America of the 1980s wars, which I did for at least half of the time between 1979 and 1990, during which I wrote my first novel. It was an outward-looking fiction, a fiction inspired by a place, terrible events in that first novel, and by my own place in them. But in the second and third novels, at least as inspiration for any character, I was absent. The tragic sudden death in 2007 of my wife, Aura, turned me inward for 3 books. 3 highly autobiographical books, though throughout the third, the fictionalizing monkey came back to life, as did life and love itself when I met Jovi, and when our young niece Jojo came to live with us, and when our daughter Azalia was born. The books I've kept close by while writing those last 3 books were Natalia Ginsburg, the authors, I should say, Toni Morrison, Grace Paley, and Roberto Bolaño, among others. I have some things to say about drawing on real life when you write, as probably most of us do to one degree or another, but I will save that and perhaps blend it into what I really mean to talk about, the subject of Zadie Smith's essay, the challenges and often necessity of writing characters so unlike ourselves. I'll only say that, of course, it is dangerous to write characters inspired by people you know. If you write out of love, you'll be less likely to cause hurt and perhaps be able to explain and apologize for what you've done. Garcia Marquez considered revenge a great motive for writing novels. I believe an amazing example of this can be found, and my wife, who's reading it, has been telling me, in Kiran Desai's new novel, The Loneliness of Sunny and Sonja, where, boy, does she stick it to a guy who screwed her. I don't know if you know the story. But and in my first novel, I was like, I knew I was going to draw my own family, but I didn't want to embarrass my parents and make them the way they were. So I said, I'm going to make them the opposite of how they are. So my angry, violent, always denigrating us father became a role model, very kind, sweet man. And my incredibly gentle, sweet, soft-spoken mother became this highly opinionated, brazen, brash, even prejudiced woman. My mother was furious. She said, now everybody's going to think I'm like that. and she, the little part of the novel that's inside where the disclaimer that this is just a work of fiction, she blew that up, glued it up and had it photocopied, blown up, and framed it and put it inside the front door, so it was the first thing anybody. And she'd say to anyone who came to our house, don't tell him anything, he'll put it in a novel. One thing I wanted to accomplish in my first novel was create a place that could only exist in a novel, a place in which Guatemala and the United States took up as much space as the other. Back in that fateful year of 2007, I was about to start a novel I've been researching for some 6 years already, set in New Bedford, Massachusetts. Yes, where Moby Dick begins. And then, in 2007, as now, it was the #1 commercial fishing port in dollar value in the United States, and also home to a large community of Central Americans, and especially of Guatemalans, and especially of indigenous Quiche Maya, most from a clustered group of townships including Zacualpa, San Andres, Xaxcabaja, Hoyabach, and Chinique, all very distant in every conceivable way from oceans and the maritime life. By research, I mean visiting, talking, and listening to people, talking and listening to them some more. I don't know what that novel would have been like, because after my wife's sudden death, my writing took a different turn. I know now I didn't know enough back then. For example, I knew about violence and death, other people's deaths. I'd been around so much of that. But before 2007, I hadn't experienced a sudden violence and death and loss for myself. And that changed me and changed everything. One thing I was convinced of was that the only way to write a novel about New Bedford, about the city as a community, about the Guatemalan Maya diaspora community within that community, would be to make one of its central characters, indeed its central protagonist, a teenaged Maya Quiche girl, an Ali, or Ke'apoch. You can't write a novel set in New Bedford without thinking about Moby Dick and the crew of the Pequod, and to wonder who would hold that place in a New Bedford-inspired narrative now. The young women who work in any of the city's dozens of fish processing houses, fish houses, hold that place. I've yet to meet a Guatemalan Quiche woman who, if she arrived in New Bedford at the age of 14 or older, some, I'm afraid, even younger, who hasn't worked in a fish house, often within 2 or so days of arriving to join a family member, and often enough after having spent 2 months, at least, in U.S. migrant detention down on the border. They almost always arrive owing money. Usually they will work a day shift so that they can go to school at night. School from 7:30 in the morning to 2:30 in the afternoon. Getting to that fish house to start a 3 p.m. shift, working 8 hours or more if there's overtime, often unpaid overtime. I mean, no overtime pay. Going home to sleep for a few hours, doing it all over again, working on Saturday, sometimes even Sunday too. The classic underpaid, exploitative, dangerous, exhausting work in a cold, wet, stinking fish house. C.R. James, in his Mariners, Renegades, and Castaways, written in 1952 while he was in U.S. immigrant detention awaiting deportation, wrote about the multi-ethnic, multinational national crew of the Pequod as representative of an American working class that, for all the human collective virtues it manifests, are being led to their doom by the authoritarian mad tyrant Ahab. In the novel, the crew doesn't rebel. In a controversial passage, James wrote about the crew in the future anterior sense, as representing a future of potential revolt. To me, it is the young migrant fish house workers working the classic minimum wage job that no American citizen worker who could have any other kind of job would ever take, who are the contemporary version in human quality and their rich and varied strength and vulnerabilities to the crew of the Pequod. My friend Gloria arrived at her big sister's home after 2 months in detention when she was 14. And within 2 days she was at work, and soon after enrolled in the local New Bedford High School. Out of 40 Central American girls who were high school classmates who were working on the night shift at her fish house, she was one of only 2 who eventually graduated. She's worked other jobs since, including during the pandemic as a hospital translator, and she has 2 children now, by 2 Guatemalan men who abandoned her. She's 26 and a U.S. citizen. She works as an assistant to an immigration lawyer. Recently, she graduated from Bristol Community College as a court translator. She often goes home to visit her parents in a small rural hamlet of Zacualpa. Her family suffered terribly during the internal conflict of the 1980s, during which the Guatemalan Army committed what a UN commission ruled was a genocide against the Highland Maya. Zacualpa was one of the hardest hit areas. Starting in 1981, when the population of Zacualpa was 18,000, the town endured so many Guatemalan army massacres that by 1983 only 2 families were still living there. The rest had either been killed or fled. The army used the convent of the local parish church as a torture center. That was why, as the human rights investigator and photographer Jean Marie Simon, my roommate in Guatemala City during many of those years, first reported after people began returning to the town, they refused to attend Mass in that church as they regarded it as having been possessed by the devil. Back in 1984, Jean Marie took the testimony from a man who until recently had been a Zacualpa resident. At first, they killed people inside the convent where no one could see. Eventually, however, they began to line them up in front of the ceiba tree in the main square and simply shot people in plain view of anyone who happened to be there. Once, the army started shooting down from the air. There were so many bullets flying that my aunt said it looked like beans raining down. I was in Central America, mostly in Guatemala, for at least half of the time between 79 and 90. Those years were my true education in life, my university with and without walls. According to the narrator of Roberto Bolaño's short story, Mauricio de I, Silvia, violence, real violence, is unavoidable, at least for those of us who were born in Latin America during the 50s and were about 20 years old at the time of Salvador Allende's death. Well, I was 18 when Allende died, and I wasn't quite born there. But by the time I was 6 months old, I was living there. My mother having fled from my father's domestic violence, establishing what would be a pattern. That's the generation I consider mine. Gloria was born in Zacualpa only a few years after the peace treaty that ended the 36-year-old internal armed conflict. But her family was severely affected by those years. She lives now in a New Bedford where sometimes people come from Guatemala to take DNA from volunteers to help identify whether they might have relatives among the recovered remains in exhumed clandestine mass graves. She also lives in a New Bedford where, in the lobby of the Eastern Fisheries Processing House, I saw a trophy displayed. The Fish House soccer team had won a local championship, and the name of the team displayed on the trophy was Zacualpa United. These two realities coexist in New Bedford, as in other immigrant communities throughout the U.S. Living in the United States, which in so many ways fomented that Guatemalan genocide, as it has done with other genocides and other crimes against humanity throughout the last century, I habitually wonder about what happens to that experience of the Guatemalan genocide over time. How does it live on inside someone like Gloria, or someone older who actually survived it, or even inside of me? I ask myself all the time what I owe to that experience. And for decades, I felt a personal responsibility to try to explore the subject in a meaningful way, and in the only way I know how, through fiction. One day, Gloria told me that the racism in the United States was easy to bear in comparison to the racism the Maya experienced in Guatemala, where she said they treat us like animals. She doesn't really feel that way anymore, doesn't speak that way anymore in the Trump era, where her community is being decimated by deportations and by the collective insecurity and fear caused by these ever-present roving ICE vehicles and agents, by government-sanctioned denigration and hatred. Since 2018, when I found myself with Jovi and Azaya, who was just months old when we arrived, living in Boston, in the Boston area for a school year, I have been regularly immersing myself in New Bedford. That's when I decided it was finally time to write that novel. I was able to imagine my autonomous Quiché Maya immigrant teenager by learning everything I possibly can about their community in New Bedford and in Zacualpa, which I've also visited. For 3 years, I've been taking online classes in Quiché Maya. because I need to be able to feel the sound of those voices inside myself as I reimagine them into English. Since the whaling era, New Bedford has been a community of people from elsewhere, from Italy, Ireland, England, French Canada, Poland, Scandinavia, South Africa, Mexico, Vietnam, most of all from Portugal and Cabo Verde, a Quaker town in the whaling days that was also an underground railroad hub, home to Frederick Douglass. Home, of course, to the white New Englanders. Over the last 35 years, a site of Central American migration, the site of a vastly complex commercial fishing industry, to marine biology and oceanography research institutions, to sweatshops in the old textile factories, the site in 2007 of one of the largest immigration raids in U.S. history, the Bianco raid of the sweatshop where mostly Guatemalan workers were making knapsacks for U.S. soldiers fighting in Iraq. 251 Guatemalans were arrested that day, many of them deported. I am now well into that novel and hope to finish it in January. Let me say here that if I had started it in 2007, I think that with a fearlessly blithe confidence, I could have written the female characters of that novel. Maybe I would have been lucky, and somehow through sheer brazen, if well-meaning bravura, pulled it off. But I kind of doubt it. Those subsequent years, during which the change in the culture that Zadie Smith challenges in her essay, in those years, that changed me too. They made me self-conscious. They intimidated me, at times made me feel even fearful of trying to write from the point of view of a young Guatemalan Quiche Maya fish house worker. What was I afraid of? Rejection, cruelty, of being called an appropriator, a colonizer, or worse, despite my own heritage and life experience, not just as a fiction writer, mostly by people who've forgotten or never knew what a fiction really presumes to be. And that's fair enough. Those things, those kinds of writers who do harm, whether carelessly or intentionally, really do exist. That's why I have worked to evolve my own ideas, a personal ethics, if you will, about how to undertake this task of writing about those that most would regard as not being at all like myself. Of course, I don't want to create a character who's a symbol of the Maya immigration, or in any way a stand-in for an editorial or political point. Josefina Chach, my character, is not supposed to be representative of anything, but she just can't seem like a bad fiction writer's clumsy, uninformed lie either. She is of her pueblo, perhaps not even in rebellion against it in any way, and if she is in some ways typical of her community, that is not what her character is about. I told myself when I was beginning that a model for me was Isabel Archer from Henry James' Portrait of a Lady. Of course, my Muchacha Maya can have a coming-of-age story as emotionally and intellectually and dramatically complex as Isabel Archer's. And just as Henry James had to know enough about her Albany origins to launch her, and about the England and Europe into which he launched her, I've worked to make myself as knowledgeable of her circumstances as I can. I want a credible, fictional, and autonomous character, one whose narrative, active life, and destiny, and whose personality and interiority are mysteries that I can pursue for years and create through sentences, one sentence at a time, sentences that, in the best cases, I work on without being sure of what I am looking for, their shape, rhythm, sound, driving me on, hopefully sometimes surprising, most of all revealing her character and the book I am searching for. To paraphrase Flaubert, the right form or structure only comes along when the illusion of the subject becomes an obsession. The illusion of the subject, a fiction. Some of these rules are, I would never take a story that belongs to someone I've met or interviewed and transpose it to my novel. I might take details that could belong to any of them. memories of what school was like in Zacualpa, for example, and other details of daily life, or about how parents speak or don't speak to their children about the genocide. I ask about everything, but I would never lift an actual identifiable story from any of their lives. I warn myself not to fetishize in any way, to not fall into, as charmed as I might be sometimes by my character, to what some call feminist cuteness. I don't have to be perfect to get everything right. I'm writing out of love and respect, and I trust that will prevent me from writing anything that could hurtfully misrepresent or cause harm. I don't have to make every Quiche Maya character a positive one or an exemplary one. I know they fail themselves and each other as much as any of us do, and it's part of my job to represent that too. I know it can be risky, and it is supposed to be risky. As Roberto Bolaño wrote, literature is basically a dangerous calling. And he added, a writer's country isn't his language, or isn't only his language. What is writing of quality? Well, what it's always been, to know how to thrust your head into the darkness, know how to leap into the void, and to understand that literature is basically a dangerous calling. A writer's duty is to see as much of the truth as possible of the society he or she inhabits, and that is often dangerous. And I'll just close with this tiny little anecdote. One of the women who have become my good friends in New Bedford, she's from San Andres, and she was having this wonderful conversation with another woman who I'm terribly frightened will be deported, Sebastiana. And Sebastiana was talking about her boyfriend, who's also Maya, who's become a scallop fisherman, which is incredibly hard work, but the highest paying work. And you can have in New Bedford, really, in the fishing industry. And she was complaining about Marvin. She said, I don't like the way Marvin's been speaking to me lately. And sometimes. And I said, why? And she said, well, he doesn't realize that I'm always right. And we were with Lucia, who is just the most incredible person. Lucia, as a teenager, in her small hamlet, there was no way to go to even to high school. And but she managed to get a scholarship to a high school in the nearby regional capital, Santa Cruz del Quiché. And there she became under the influence of an extraordinary woman from there. Was one of the few indigenous women to be elected to Congress in Guatemala. And she decided that she, at the age of 19, was going to run for mayor of San Andres. And she conducted an astounding campaign. I have all these photographs of it, stressing feminist issues, the rights of women, issues of local injustice and poverty and everything. And she was running against like 12, mostly mestizo men. She still managed to come in fourth. But there were many threats. And finally, one day she was basically abducted. Sexual violence is a constant. It's the thing most young women flee. They never talk explicitly about it. They'll just say something like, and it was awful, a terrible thing happened. I don't want to talk about it. And And her family was being threatened. And she didn't want to put her family in danger anymore. And she was, of course, frightened what would happen if those men came back for her. And she left. She just set out walking for the United States. She spent 3 months in immigrant detention in Texas. She did have an older sister in New Bedford and finally got there. She's extraordinary. She has a child. She has a good husband who works in construction. she has a green card now. And anyway, in that same conversation, I said, does your husband ever talk to you that way? She goes, no. I go, what would you do? She goes, and what would you do if he goes, he would never talk to me because he would never talk to me that way because if he did, he knows frega. And I want to close in just saying I would never put her story in my novel, as extraordinary as it is. It's her story. But frega. That's exactly the kind of thing I'll take. Thank you. I was supposed to do any question and answer? Yeah, sorry. I hope I didn't go too long. But thank you for listening to me. I've been working on this the last 3 days. It's still a little rough. Yeah, yes?
That was fascinating, thank you. And was a rough translation of frega?
Yeah, like frega, like you'll regret it. Anything else? Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to me. Bye.
Thank you so much. We'll have a little bit of break as we assemble for the panel, which will all take place here, right? So see you in a few for, what is it? The scene of the crime? Something like that? See you soon. We'll begin in a few minutes, folks.
Test. Test.
All right, come and find your nice, cool places, folks.
Welcome, folks. Let's settle down for this is the first panel. Are we good to go? Thank you very much. So some preparatory remarks, especially for those of you who haven't been here before. The reason that we have a panel, one reason besides they're informative and kind of wonderful to be all together around, is that you may not actually get to work with these individual writers. We've got a huge staff and they're incredible. So this is your chance to meet Chris, Shobha, and Tyler. I'm Andrew Tonkovich. I edit the Santa Monica Review, and I'm founding editor of Orange County's unlikeliest magazine, Citric Acid. Please subscribe. Thank you for laughing. I also have my usual prop, and I think it comes in real handy here. This is a book by my teacher and mentor, Oakley Hall, co-founder of this very conference. And you'll notice that Brett and Lisa and Louie do an amazing job trying to hit all of the following. So I made a list: setting, plot, scene, character, dramatization, point of view. And this is an actual title from this book by Oakley, which is titled The Art and Craft of Novel Writing. Feel free to steal it for the title of your own novel. It's called Information and Sex, which we won't be dealing with today. This is a family audience here. But the point is that I'm proud of this panel because its title has 3 different considerations. Crime, that's a genre, but scene, setting, and plot. So we've sort of combined them. And these writers have different backgrounds, and they have different topics that they deal with, and they're in different genre. So that just roll with us a little bit. There may not be, well, there is one crime fiction writer here, but we're using the term crime in a kind of an existential way, a creative way, a narrative way, to try to invite you to think about the consequences and the choices that you make vis-a-vis setting and plot in particular. So we're going to, for sure, allow, and Lisa's going to help me, at least 15 minutes for questions. Okay, so please know you will be heard, and these smart folks will do their best to answer. This is ostensibly about craft, but I'm sure that you will invite their autobiographical information, their motivations, and for these 3 writers in particular, their research that they've done in order to arrive at their particular books. So not to have over-choreographed this too much, but please work with me. I'm going to ask Chris to start off, and then our 2 other writers, to read a section, could be as short as a page or 2 pages to you, and then ask them to please talk about what they see there by way of a moment and a scene that has something to do with setting and plot. My argument offered today is the 3 need each other, and I don't think Chris is going to disagree with me. So here's Chris starting us out.
I completely disagree. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. Thank you to the Hall family. Thank you to the entire Community of Writers family for having me here. It's wonderful to be back. It's wonderful to see you all here. It feels like we're off to an awesome start. I'm going to read just a brief chapter from the middle of my book, which is The Third Bank of the River, Power and Survival in the 21st Century Amazon. It's essentially a survey of the contemporary Amazon rainforest that goes back to the pre-colonial and indigenous origins of the rainforest all the way through the 2014 World Cup. And so I'm going to read a piece that takes place the summer after the 2014 World Cup, and some of you might remember that a few of those matches were played in Manaus, which is the capital of Amazonas State. So this chapter is called BT's Gang. A year after the World Cup, shit had gotten worse in Manaus. Whole families were out of work. The lucky ones who still had jobs could afford less each payday. Beans, clothes, gas, everything was getting more expensive by the month. Lately, it seemed like people only talked about debts, the ultimate fighting championship, and dirty politicians. Lava Jato proved what most Brazilians knew in their gut. The country was led by bandits. For years, the fat cats at Petróleo Brasileiro, the state-run petroleum enterprise, had been letting other fat cats gouge the enterprise on contracts, using the dirty money to buy real estate, toys, and friends in high places. The graft ran straight to the top. Now the streets were full of protesters saying enough is enough. Even Lula and President Dilma were under the microscope. Hundreds of millions in public money showered on rich crooks while workers could barely keep up with the bus fares. If there was one good thing about the heat wave pouring over Amazonas, at least it gave people something to talk about besides corruption. Lately, there was hardly any rain, not even a breeze to blow away the alien haze over the city, a blend of exhaust, factory pollution, and wildfires burning up the forest. The overcrowded prisons were overheated, with inmates killing each other like mad rats. Even Facebook was sweltering. In one viral video, a woman cracked an egg on a pan in the street, zooming the camera in slowly, the shadows of her friends bobbing on the pavement, nervous laughter as the yolk fried in the sun. People posted snapshots of bank thermometers on the fritz, digital displays gone haywire as if the heat were beyond measure. To take a bus during rush hour was to climb aboard a torture device. Passengers crammed like cattle, headaches on the way to work, brawls on the way home. The Diario do Amazonas sent a cub reporter to investigate the outrageous temperatures on public transit. Even the air-conditioned executive buses registered 28 degrees Celsius. On the Common Line, the mercury touched 45, 113 degrees Fahrenheit. A doctor warned that young children and old people should avoid the bus if possible. Make sure to drink 2 liters of water a day, 3 liters if you have a long commute. Eating extra fruit couldn't hurt either. Otherwise, pray for rain. On the afternoon Beatty and Foro decided to execute the plan, the sky was white hot at the edges. 2 weeks they'd been following this guy. They trailed him in stalled traffic, heat-struck drivers roasting behind their steering wheels. They trailed him in afternoon thunderstorms that brought people out into the street for a moment of sweet relief. They trailed him too close for comfort, ducking to avoid his gaze in the rearview mirror. By now, they knew his routine, his shortcuts, his favorite stops for a little coffee and chit-chat. They knew that when he stopped into Banco Bradesco on Avenida Lopez, he'd come out with a sack of cash for some dude in Educandos. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. I couldn't have asked for better. So I'm struck by another thing as I hear you read it, is that it's almost as if the scene is a projection of this authority of voice, which you certainly have, Chris. I don't know which of the many moments for you would have been what triggered the scene. Was it the egg on the sidewalk? Because you've got us to get us to the point of this, in fact, crime. Can you talk a little bit about composing that?
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, for me, I think, so I'd spent a couple of years in Brazil, especially in Amazonas State, in the years leading up to the World Cup and then during the World Cup. And then I returned the summer after, and one of the big reactions people had was like, wait, you're back? Like, nobody's coming, like, we thought nobody was coming back after the World Cup in terms of, like, international correspondence. And so for me, one of the things that I wanted to capture was, in addition to just, like, the heat and intensity, was just sort of, like, the ways in which, like, the city was sort of suffering the consequences of just this influx of cash and development that then poured into Manaus and then just poured right back out after the cup was over. And so for me, when I think of crime, I mean, there's a lot of ways to think about crime, but for me, a big part of it is survival. Like, crime often, I mean, there's like crimes of passion, greed, revenge, so forth. But then there's also like crimes of oftentimes like survival. How do people get what they need? And so for me, this chapter was about like setting the stage for 2 characters who were about to commit a crime to get what they need, and then the subsequent like 200 pages is sort of the aftermath of they picked the wrong guy to kill.
Thanks for that. Care to share next?
Hi, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. I'm going to read a little bit from the opening of my most recent novel, Indian Country. And just to set it up, there's a young couple, Sagar and Jahnavi, who come from India. The husband, Sagar, is a hydraulic engineer, and he's been hired to take down a dam in southeastern Montana. And one of his colleagues, her name is Rennie, and it's from her perspective I'm going to read from, and she is in charge as an anthropologist to to sort of take out the artifacts at a burial plot that's going to be flooded once the dam is removed. So she's in charge of sort of repatriating the burial plot. This Saturday afternoon picnic was Rennie's celebration, the start of a new life, a rebirth, she called it. A new apartment, a new job, and finally enough money to enroll her 4-year-old daughter in daycare. After years of working dead-end jobs, a steady one that paid all the bills was a blessing. She parked her rundown Toyota Tacoma among the sagebrush and the wild grapevines. She got out of the pickup, took a deep breath, and then lifted her daughter out of the car seat. They walked holding hands to the river's edge, and then she laid out the blanket and the bags of food, along with a few beers for herself. After the heartache and agony and the long days excavating the burial site, the pop of the beer can, the fizz that followed, was celestial music. And this, the constant, easy motion of the river, the sun on her neck, the flow of light and heat and water. She looked out over the Cotton River. She looked at the dam just past where she laid down their blanket, and then at the burial site. To think that she was here yesterday, working. She lived here all her life and had not once imagined that the dam would be gone, that the river, one day, would run free. Her gaze, without her bidding, flickered to the water rushing through the notch. She smiled to herself. Funny to think that taking down a dam, a structural and civil engineering marvel, was as simple as punching a few holes in it. Her daughter squealed, yelled out, "Mama, catch!" The bright red ball bonked her in the face. She laughed. She said, "Later, here, come eat your sandwich." The little girl picked up the ball, which had rolled back toward her, and plopped down next to her mother. She said, "Mama, I almost forgot. Lily killed a frog yesterday on the playground. It was a little one, and Lily killed it. She stomped on it till it died. I told her not to, but Lily didn't listen. Mrs. Nelson said it would go to heaven. And then the class watched as she buried it. She made Lily say nice things about the frog. Can we buy the frog some flowers, Mama? Can we?" The woman looked at her daughter. How could a body so small hold so many words? How much later was it? An hour? A 2? A pickup, a swirl of summer dust, just on the edge of the cottonwoods. Probably some kids drinking and carousing on the last Saturday before school started. But her gaze held. The dust settled. Then came 3 questions the woman had never before considered, not in this order. The first, how good was her sightline? The second, how many bullets did she have? And the third, what good was a gun when you left it in the car?
Well, I'd like to know the answer to those questions. What a setup. That's remarkable. I'm not suggesting this, but since this is a panel on craft, do you ever try to quantify at some point when you're composing? Because I just wrote down pickup, frog, ball, dam, picnic, daughter, dust. I mean, I'm not recommending it, but verbs, nouns, all these constructions, they really are constructions. Mm-hmm. Could you talk a little bit about, it's also very cinematic too, but go for it.
Thank you. Well, I think it's all about populating a scene, right? And adding a kind of lushness to it. So for instance, I could have had, the woman go on a picnic. She doesn't open a beer can. I didn't have to have that sensory element, right? But to hear the pop of a beer can, I think adds the element of hearing into that scene, which hadn't been there until then. The ball, I could have just said a ball, but I made it a bright red ball to engage the eyes of the reader. So I think all of these elements are about engaging the reader's sensory world, as well as the world in which the novel is taking place.
Thank you, appreciate it. I've been looking over at the title of what you're about to read, and I'm just so intrigued. Here's Tyler Dilts.
This is the opening of my 3rd novel, Cold and Broken Hallelujah. And what Andrew's referring to is I have kind of a gimmick for the beginning of every chapter. It's about the murder of an unhoused man, and each chapter opens with something that was in the shopping cart that was found next to him when he was murdered. I wasn't going to read the beginning, but I'll read it since Andrew mentioned it. Chapter 1, shopping cart, Whole Foods Market, very good condition, contents itemized below. There are some evenings in Long Beach, usually in the late summer and early fall, when the air stops moving, all traces of wind disappear, and even a mile or more inland, the smells of oiled sand, of decaying sea life, of the harbor, of all the urban detritus that washes out of the mouth of the Los Angeles River, hang thick in the air. We're reminded, yet again, that a beach is not always a beach, simply by virtue of its proximity to the immense blue waters of the Pacific. That we don't live in Malibu or Laguna, and that even though we're geographically centered between those 2 paradisiacal coasts, our real essence lies not even on the same continuum of natural beauty that they inhabit, but rather on a man-made, industrialized plane of cargo ships and containerized trains and diesel trucks. We're reminded that long ago we surrendered any claims we might have once had to the scenic beauty and purity of the natural world, succumbing to the all-encompassing demands of commerce, and that the toxic, decaying smell that sometimes hangs in the motionless air late into the night is just one of the many prices we pay in Long Beach so that other people on other beaches might enjoy the fresh and promising scent of the onshore flow.
I just want to say, you and Vanita Blackburn are never going to get invited to the Long Beach Chamber of Commerce luncheon. That's terrific, and I say that having lived near there. Can you talk a little bit about what part of the Tyler Dilts imagination this comes from? Is it the part that has probably read Ross MacDonald and all those kind of heroes? Or is it, I'm going to talk about with all three of this, the documentarian, the travelogue writer, or I think I'm answering my own question, all 3 or 4 or 5 of those?
Yeah, a little bit of all of that. Maybe initially it comes from that book right there, which was the textbook in the very first novel writing class I ever had.
Oh, wow.
And then it was the textbook as long as it was in print when I was teaching novel writing. So for the first couple of years, it was Oakley Hall's The Art and Craft of Novel Writing. The other biggest inspiration is probably James Lee Burke, one of my favorite crime writers. He writes about Louisiana primarily, a little bit about Montana. But I always kind of wanted to do for Long Beach what he did for New Iberia, Louisiana, and New Orleans. There's a way that he connects the natural world and the setting and the habitat that characters exist in to the darkness of the crime that he writes about. And that's what I was reaching for here. I mean, it's my most blatant imitation of James Lee Burke, I think. But I do think I got it in this instance, at least what I wanted to do. And I wanted to show that part of Long Beach that has been essentially dehumanized. There are parts of Long Beach that are wonderful and vibrant, and it's a great city to live in. I live in it, and I enjoy it. But there are parts of it that are very bleak. And this is one of those places, and I really wanted to evoke that bleakness in the death of this unhoused man.
So there's a fancy word that I can't spell called verisimilitude. You're a journalist. I think maybe all 3 of us have done some journalistic writing. I'd kind of like to call it documentary or documentarian. Can you start us off, especially with someone with the credentials of a real globetrotting reporter? Are you looking for verisimilitude because you want to persuade somebody, or are you that it's real, or are you looking for a documentarian quality to prove that you know that it is real?
I mean, that's a great question. I mean, from my perspective, I do think about the notion of verisimilitude, and from my perspective, the person that I need to convince is that it's real is myself as I'm composing the rest of the chapter, the rest of the passage. So, for example, the passage that I was reading from was rooted in, I mean, it was a typical like crime story on the nightly news in Manaus. So it was one of those things where you get like, it was the shooting of this courier was captured in somebody's like cell phone footage, the kind where it's like, we're going to loop the same 8 seconds of cell phone footage around this news clip in the evening news. So for me, then the challenge is, how do I take that as a starting point and actually go and find the details necessary to bring the verisimilitude, to bring that scene to life? And so in my case, it was a matter of finding the location of the actual bank where that happened, like driving the actual routes that were known that these folks were driving, walking into the bank at different times of day, and just trying to, for lack of a better word, I wish I could attribute this. There was a writer who once called it like the art of hanging out, but it is like just the art of sort of like loitering about and just paying attention. For sensory detail, like you mentioned, looking at, one of my favorite things to do when I travel, especially in like taxis, if there's a old newspaper, sometimes you'll find like just old papers like in the back of like the seat, and I love just like taking those and just like reading old newspapers, because that's where you find like the texture of life and like clues, for lack of a better word. So for me, it is really about like a hunt for sensory detail, a hunt for verisimilitude, to get to a point where I, in composing the scene, feel like I'm not just like bullshitting. And that for me, my MFA was in fiction, so I have an undergraduate degree in journalism. I did my MFA in fiction, so I sort of have these modes, some of which are more like creative writing, artistic in nature, others are more like newspaper reporter in nature. So for me, if I'm working on something that is like journalism, it's important for me to find the factual detail, but to make it have that felt verisimilitude and sensory detail as well.
Thank you. Shobha, you've also challenged yourself because you've taken responsibility in a way for a kind of political, sociological, forgive me, cultural, multicultural perspective here. Is that something that you're actively grabbing as your own when you construct a scene with an Indian American? Sorry, I don't know what's going on here with this. Because that seems to me like someplace where you're really going to get called BS on if you don't get it right.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. And I was well aware of that in the writing of the novel. In fact, the novel, I would argue, was born out of journalism, because years before I even thought of writing this novel or considered, I was reading an article about the Highway of Tears in British Columbia. For those of you who don't know, it's like a 450-mile stretch of highway in an incredibly isolated part of British Columbia, where along this highway are dozens of First Nations reservations, and also along this highway, the bodies of dozens of Native American First Nations women and girls have either gone missing or been found murdered. And in the article that I was reading, it stated that most of these crimes have gone unsolved because of lack of, police investigative will, resources, etc. And at the end of this article, there was a First Nations elder who was quoted, and she said something to the effect of, "Our girls have been forgotten. Nobody cares about them, and they are lost. They've been forgotten." And I remember walking away, and I refused to accept that. I thought, no, they will not be forgotten. And over those weeks, the conviction grew in me that something has to remember. And what I decided, I just decided this, is that land and waters hold human memory, and they hold our memories and the memories of these girls. And that became the theme, the main theme of Indian Country. So yes, well aware of the enormity of what I was entering, but also entering it with incredible conviction and grace and awareness, right? That I'm telling beautiful, heartbreaking, and resplendent stories that I owe allyship to and allegiance to and love to. And so, yeah, with that awareness is how I set foot into the writing of this novel.
Thank you, I appreciate this. And if you didn't write it down, I did. Land and water hold human memory. Well done. So I'm guessing if I go to your study or your office at Cal State Long Beach, there's big maps everywhere because you must know and have diagrammed and understand exactly how Long Beach is connected.
No actual physical maps.
Yeah.
But is that working? Yeah. Okay. But a lot of digital maps, and just a lot of legwork. One thing that I often do when I get writer's block or I don't know what needs to happen next, I either walk or I get in my car and I go to the places where I'm setting scenes in my novel. But yeah, I do think I know Long Beach pretty well, but it's important to me to capture it as authentically as I can. One of my favorite professors in grad school always used to say that the difference between fiction and nonfiction is that fiction has to be believable. And for me, a big part of making it believable and authentic is getting those physical details right. Also, I've learned that if I put authentic restaurants in my fiction, sometimes they will give me free food, which is just a side benefit.
Just because I want to geek out a little bit, would you explain to people the difference between Signal Hill and, say, oh, I don't know, what's the little Belmont Shores? I mean, that's what you're talking about in this book, is vast socioeconomic and topographic and geographical differences in a place that's actually not that big. Was it? You'd know the population of Long Beach.
A little over 500,000.
Yeah, I was going to say 450,000 or so.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things I love about Long Beach is it's 100 small towns right next to each other. Signal Hill is actually an independent city within the city of Long Beach, which arose through sort of the convoluted oil history of Long Beach. Long Beach was built on oil, and oil money and oil power shaped Long Beach. And there was a point in the history of Long Beach where the oil companies weren't getting enough yeses from the civic leadership. So they incorporated a smaller chunk where most of the remaining oil reserves were within Long Beach, and incorporated it as an independent city. So they no longer had to abide by the very minimal laws that Long Beach was incorporating in terms of the oil development and extraction. That's an isolated case that there's an independent city, but neighborhoods are so very different. They're like, you go to one part of Long Beach, it doesn't even seem like it's a part of the same city as another part.
I'm just putting it out there. I think it's UC Press that has a series called People's Guide to fill in the blank. Los Angeles, or People's History, one of Orange County, which our friend Gustavo Arellano did. I think you need to pitch the People's Guide to Long Beach.
That's a great idea. Sounds like a lot of work, though.
Oh, okay. Well, you'll be paid extremely handsomely
okay.
for it, no doubt.
No. There's a little bit of Long Beach in the LA version.
That's right.
Yeah, but I would love to see. I would love to see in Long Beach's own version of that.
I'm emphasizing this because I think these are authentic voices who've done the actual research. So Tyler's a polite guy, but if somebody gets the intersection wrong, he's going to quietly, correct them or let them go on with their silliness about, where's the Queen Mary or, whatever. And I think that shows in all of your work. So that's the documentary angle, or the verisimilitude angle. I want to read Oakley Hall quoting, of course, E.M. Forster, and then ask you guys about the next part, which is plot. And everyone here in the room already knows it, but it's just fun to say. The king died, and then the queen died is a story. The king died, and then the queen died. Everybody say it together.
Of grief.
Of grief is a plot. Care to opine, Mr. Chris?
It's interesting to think about plot as it relates to place. And as I was just listening to all of us sort of describe the genesis of these different books or the different projects, or Tyler, your relationship to Long Beach, and knowing that certain places were carved out for oil extraction, for example, or that a certain highway can have this legacy of disappearance and death. For me, it's interesting to think about places as always having a plot interwoven, and oftentimes a criminal plot interwoven into the fabric of the place itself. So, for example, almost like any city, if you think about crime as in some ways just an exercise in power, almost every city has been designed in some ways to shift or direct power a certain way. And so even if you're not thinking of yourself as writing crime, as long as you're writing about place, chances are crime has had a place in the role, or a role in the place that you're writing about. And in some ways, that is where place and plot can intersect, right? Is because all of us, depending on where we live or wherever your stories take place, are unfolding in a city, a state, a countryside, or so forth, where that power has had an influence. So to bring it back to plot and story for me, is whenever I'm visiting a place, whether it's, not even if I'm visiting a place for writing purposes, but I always ask myself, how did this place get like this? Why is this city like this? And almost always there's a story or a plot behind that, and almost always there's some sort of criminal underbelly to that as well.
Shobha, you care to weigh in?
God, I hate plot. I hate the word. I hate everything. It's such
It's a hole in the ground, isn't
It
it?
is. It's a deep, dank, miserable hole. And, when I started off writing, which maybe I'm started off writing every single day when I look at the blank page, honestly. But, it was this, something has to happen. Why can't I be one of those French authors that just write a woman sitting at a window thinking about this affair, and, 200 pages later, you're like, wow, that was such a good book, and she wins the Nobel Prize in Literature. And I'm like, what? So I don't I have a very difficult relationship with plot. And I've committed myself to, because it's so, it just destroys me. I've committed myself to keep my characters in motion at all times, because I slow them down, then I get into this fugue of, what am I even doing? And am I, how does Bolaño do it? I don't get it. I mean, I'm never going to be good enough. So I just keep them in motion constantly. And so it's almost, I just a frontal attack on plot.
Good advice. Tyler?
Killed the queen?
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the reasons I started writing crime stories was because I always had trouble shaping plots, shaping stories. And I figured if I wrote a crime novel, it would be easy because somebody would die at the beginning, and then at the end, we'd know who did it. Then along the way, though, I discovered that I wasn't a fan of neat and tidy crime stories. So now it's somebody dies at the beginning, and then maybe we know who did it at the end. Maybe we don't. Maybe we maybe we give up. We throw our hands up in despair. The novel that excerpt is from, it's not a mystery in the sense of who committed the crime, that the murderers are apprehended at the scene of the crime. The mystery in that novel is who the victim was, because he's an unhoused man with no identification, and the detective story is figuring out who he was. But there's that basic idea for me. It's always, there's a question at the beginning, and one way or another, that question will be dealt with at the end. It might be answered. We might know an answer. We might not know an answer. But we're either going to know that we have the answer, or the answer doesn't exist in a way that we can understand it.
Chris's Places Have a Plot sort of nicely echoes what Shobha said earlier. Hey, anybody know where the African American community in Santa Monica is? It's under the Santa Monica Freeway. They tore up the entire black community in order to build this magnificent freeway. And I'm not Ross McDonald or Tyler Dilts, and you don't have to be a Marxist to figure that out, although it kind of helps. It's time for Q&A. You provide the cues and we provide the, yes, sir, John. Real loud, please.
Yes, so I have a question for Shobha. I'm going to go back to your opening comments. You were talking about the inclusion of the details, the red ball, the pop of the beer can. So it's a two-part question.
Yeah.
First, from a process standpoint, where does that come in? Does that appear to you the first time, or is that something where you get it down and come back? And then secondly, what, if anything, do those choices matter for you? So for instance, why a beer can versus maybe scotch?
Ooh, okay, so let me try to tackle both of those. Thank you for the questions. It happens as I'm writing initially, right? Because to me, it's far more painful to go back and enter these, sensory elements, because then I've got to just then weave them back through. It just becomes a nightmare. So what I do when I sit down to write is, and a teacher of writing told me this long ago, that we all tend to focus on one sensory element, probably the one we live out in our lives the most. So I make a very particular emphasis as I'm writing to be like, I haven't engaged sound yet, or I haven't engaged touch yet. So I constantly am rigorously examining my own telling to make sure that all of them, those sensory elements, are engaged. And John, what was the second part of the question? Oh, why beer and not scotch?
Yeah, right.
Okay. I think
Gin and tonic.
Gin and tonic. So what would you take on a picnic, right? So that automatically kind of limits me. And I think it's intuitive, and here's the thing, writing, the craft of writing, I'm going to go on a bender here. Yeah. Okay, great. If I were to give you a tree or a piece of wood and say to you, make me a chair, by the end of the day, maybe by the end of the week, we could make a rickety legged stool, maybe. But if I said to you, if I gave you a 2x4 and said, no, I want you to make me a throne worthy of queens, then you know what? It would take us years upon years, if not decades. And that is how I see the craft of writing. You have to develop the intuitive sense, and that is pure practice of the craft of writing and reading. So that is, I would say I chose beer because I've been writing for 25 years relentlessly, and intuitively, I thought Rennie's gonna drink beer, not scotch. And it's intuitive. I can't quite say this is the steps, but it is my making of this supposed throne. And it just, that's what we're trying to do here, right? Is develop the intuition of who we are as writers, and thereby the decades of toil.
Can I bender off your bender? I love exactly what you're saying there. Okay, I will further this to say that if there's one thing that is the enemy of that intuition, it is the phone in your pocket.
Oh my God.
And I'll say that for me, I count myself very fortunate that the vast majority of my development as a writer and the vast majority of my time spent in this book, reporting this book, was like pre-cell phone, like Google Maps. When you still needed things like physical maps, asking for directions, wandering around, looking out the window, tuning your senses to the world to develop and hone that intuition.
I love that.
Thank you both.
Please, real loud.
So I have a question for Chris, but I wonder if Shobha actually might have just answered it.
All right. You nailed it.
When you were writing about the heat, it was so visceral, and maybe just because it's also hot right now. I felt it so much, and even as you continue to give descriptions, not just with the egg in the frying pan, but with the heat in the bus, all of it being like a torture chamber or whatnot. I think there is a mistake that maybe writers make of like doing too much. Where sometimes like I'll read something, I'm like, yeah, okay, I get it. It was, it's hot. The way you did it is it was perfect. It was just the right amount of like, oh my God, it's hot here. But I didn't get to the place where I was like, okay, we got it, it's hot, right? How do you know when to stop that? Is it, for example, the intuition of like you've been writing so long and you just know, or does it come afterwards during the editing process where you just have to scratch yourself out? Like, how do you get there?
Thank you. And in that case, part of it was just doing the reporting and the walking around, because it was hot, but I had to ask myself, like, is this like unusually hot? Because it feels unusually hot, but it actually turns out it was unusually hot. So just talking to a bunch of people, but also going back to the craft and the pacing of the scene. Later on in the scene, this cash courier goes into this air-conditioned bank, and for those of you who've ever been in like in the global south, in air-conditioned spaces on a hot moment like this, like it's like extremely air-conditioned, like almost supernaturally cold. So the buildup of the heat is sort of counterpointed by like the frigidness of the air conditioning where the shooting takes place. So I guess there was also like a component of wanting to counterbalance the heat and the cold. But going back to intuition, it was just sort of a matter of like writing and revision and trying to find out like when is too much. And if I were to go back, there's probably like 5 more lines of intense heat that I probably like pared back on.
Did you want to weigh in on that one?
No, I'm okay.
Okay. Yes, real loud, please.
For Chris, actually, as well, when you're talking about, people were saying this, we were talking about the kind of corruption that was going on with Lula and different stuff like this. Like, how do you go about, when I'm thinking about nonfiction, like thinking about kind of, like you said, the voice of authority, like saying, people were saying this, and like really, like, yeah, okay, so I'm really catching a moment here that people are all talking about this. Like, obviously, I'm sure you go talk to people, like you were saying, and intuition, but like, how do you kind of say that, this bald kind of statement, and like feel like you're really stating what's true, that you're tapping into like cultural or a moment of that milieu where people are just talking about that, and you really feel like you're representing what was really in the zeitgeist at that moment. Like, how do you feel confident in that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, part of it is before making a trip like that, just like reading the news. But obviously, the news is just an encapsulation, and like you then have to test what you're reading in the news on the street and like talking to people. I love traveling by myself, and when I travel, I love to just like eavesdrop like constantly, and just basically just sit there and like take long, slow meals, or just like sit on a corner and eat. For like there are entire days of my reporting process that's just like sitting on a corner and eating and like in just eavesdropping, right? And going back to what I was saying about the phone, like for me that sort of looking for the answer in the air, in what you're hearing and what you're seeing in conversation with people, rather than like researching the answer, for me I think is part of that, is that after spending time just at bars, on street corners, at restaurants, just talking to people in conversation, like I felt confident that was sort of like it was in the zeitgeist that summer.
Other questions? In the back, please, real loud.
Yeah, sure. Thank you all so much. This is really great. So for people who, for whatever series of reasons, can't get on a plane and leave where they are, really, I mean, like when I think about research and what we're talking about as like journalistic, right? Of course, obviously, staying and writing stories that are close to home, whatever home is one option. But if one wanted to write a story that was less close to home, but didn't have the resources of time or money or whatever it is, do you all have ways that you've engaged as researchers that did not involve sitting for a few hours? No, I'm not saying that in a diminishing way at all. I'm just trying to think like expansively.
Good question.
Reading other writers who have written about that place. I mean, starting off with Google, unfortunately, to get a rough sense, but that's just the very beginning. That's not the end point. It's finding voices from those places and, taking in as much as I can from those people who've written about it in ways that feel very authentic. And there is no substitute for actually being able to be in the place that you're writing about. But the next best thing, I think, for me is find people who have written very authentically about it the way that you want to write about it, and use that as a resource.
Other advice?
So my novel takes place in two places, Montana being one of them, starting in the early 1800s, and then along the Ganges River, or the Ganga, in India, also starting in the early 1800s. Neither of the places had I been to. Well, I think I went to the Ganga when I was maybe 5 years old, and Montana I had not been to. But I read a lot of books, starting with Montana Territory history up to the present, and it's amazing. And the same with I read about the river, the Ganges. I read about the temples. I read as widely as I could, and it's amazing what you retain and how it will sort of I don't know, come back up effervescently when you sit down to write. You can surprise yourself. So read the books and then put them away. And then if you have specific things along the way, that's when I would invoke the Google, right? And it's amazing, just staring at the prairie in Montana. I would sit and stare at one picture for 10 minutes, just trying to sort of enter it through the imagination, and then I would close the picture and start to write. So there's a little kind of tricks of the trade, right, that we can use, imagination being the most powerful of those tools.
Yeah, and of course, almost everybody can go to a museum. Almost everybody can go to the public library, and for me at least, listening to oral histories or listening to authoritative voices who have captured both in reality and imagination the place that they come from is certainly a way to, I won't say cheat, but to construct your own authoritative voice. Tyler already weighed in, but I'll let him offer a second recommendation, and then I'll ask like I always like to do, ask our next two authors to recommend a very meaningful book or an urgently meaningful book or something that you want everybody to read, because maybe it is a clue to you or just informs your own worldview. You get a second choice. You already have one.
Right now, one of the writers who is really, really sort of inspirational for me is S.A. Cosby. He's a black Southern writer, and he evokes place and he evokes character in ways that remind me a little bit of James Lee Burke, but he writes about a different world from a different perspective. But I find him doing the same kind of thing that I'm always aiming for, you know. But S.A. Cosby, King of Ashes, Blacktop Highway. He's got 4 or 5 books out now. He's probably my favorite crime writer now.
Thanks.
I would say Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor. Absolutely relentless, devastating, beautiful. There are no paragraph breaks. So it is solid, gorgeous, heart-stopping text. It's one of those books where you read it and you're like, why do I bother? Like, you know, yeah. So it's a humbling and elevating book both at once.
I would say, and I'll talk more about this on Thursday in my craft talk, but the book Brother, I'm Dying by Edwidge Danticat, which for me is just like an incredible blend of family history, national history, and just incredible, gorgeous writing throughout. So if you haven't read that, pick it up for sure.
Can I add one thing, just based on what Shobha said? You do want to find things that are inspirational, but you also want to be reading some stuff that makes you think, I could do better than that. So it's a combination of really beautiful, inspirational stuff, and then stuff that makes you think, no, I've got something that I can do that will top that.
Please help me in thanking our panelists, and thank you for coming.
Hello, hello. Welcome to the 2 o'clock panel. I love the sound of you under this tent. A couple things. What was the first thing? Oh, yes, you're getting to know the staff in workshops and in individual conferences and in craft talks and panels. And I just want you to know that our bookstore is now open, where if you ever want to follow your desire or curiosity as to, like, what did that person write, you can walk across the deck there and check it out in our Dream Wagon, the bookstore on wheels. And at the end of this panel, I'll be giving you advice about where you might want to go next. But right now, I just want to introduce Diana Wagman, who's moderating the panel. I saw Diana do something like this a couple of years ago, and I've been dreaming of bringing it here ever since. So I really appreciate Diana helping fulfill my dream. Here you go. You're in very good hands.
Anything I can do, Lisa. Hi, how's your first day? Woohoo! Mine too, it's pretty great. So I have a panel here, but I didn't prepare introductions, so I don't know who these people are. I'm just gonna ask some questions and they will hopefully jump in. We're gonna talk about bad guys, which are my favorite characters. I love bad guys. I like dismemberment. I like, I don't know, disemboweling. There's a good word. How about being skinned alive? That's good. Bad guys, really great. But how do you, as the sweet little grandmother that I am, write somebody that's really bad? And these 4 writers are really good at it. All kinds of bad guys, from characters to places to modes of thought. There are lots of ways for bad guys to be bad. I think we all remember good bad guys. Can anybody think of a bad guy that they love from fiction? Hannibal Lecter, yes. And, I don't think, Tom, what's his name? The writer, I don't think he was a cannibal. I don't know that. I haven't had dinner with him. But I don't think he was a cannibal, so it's great. How did he write this? What about Voldemort? I mean, the jury's out on J.K. Rowling. She could be Voldemort, but he's a great bad guy. Moriarty, O'Brien from 1984. That's Stephen Miller's favorite character in literature. There are some really wonderful bad guys, and these 4 writers brought some in. So I want to start with the woman in the red shirt, Ananda, is that how I say it? Yes. Ananda, who wrote a book where the bad guy is the worst bad guy of all. He's the devil. And I want to know, you made him so interesting and so surprising and unexpected. Could you talk about that impetus and how you did it?
Thank you so much. And I love this introduction, much better than introducing us all these bad guys. Yes, so when I started writing that character, I didn't know how he was going to turn out, but I had been reading about the devil a lot, which is really fun. And I also read, there's a lot of, as any subject you can pick, there's a lot of theory, people who work in the English departments of life, etc., written about the devil. And it's great because it's that very dense prose, like it puts you to sleep, but it's also very like, so I didn't know how he was going to be, but I had a lot of things in my mind. One is I knew sort of the history of the character of the devil from sort of medieval times to now, and how it evolved and how it's used by different people. Talking about a villain, and people think about craft, right? They use in real life, like politically, they use villainy, right, to move votes and actions. So I was thinking about that. I was also thinking of Ronald Reagan. And I watched that documentary that came out like there's always a bunch of documentary, but I was watching these documentaries, and it was the first Trump presidency. So I was thinking a lot of this lineage from one to the other, but there's all this stuff that I didn't want to rewrite the stuff I was reading. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna write about the devil, and he surprised me, and I feel like it was much more sympathetic to the devil than I thought it was gonna be, and that was surprising in a great way. And in the book, the writer kind of has a thing with the devil, and it was very fitting because me as the writer was charmed by this character. So it was a surprise for me, and he's still bad, but we don't see that much on the page for this book. Yeah.
He doesn't take her soul or and have great sex. So, it's an unusual devil. But I think what you said, Ananda, is the right thing. It's about empathy, that you understood him, you in your own way, and you saw him as a complete character. I think it's very important when we write bad guys that we know them as well as we know our protagonists, that they have all sides. So, Dana, your work is different in that your bad guys are relationships. The mother is bad sometimes. The best friend is bad sometimes. The boys the characters attracted to are bad sometimes. But none of them are, they're not going to disembowel her.
Right.
So.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
Can you guys? There we go. Yeah, I was thinking about what I like in fiction, which often are characters who are inadvertently bad or accidentally bad or don't mean anybody any harm, and yet they inflict egregious harm. And so I think about that a lot. I think about how to write people like that, which is to try and give them a context and a background and a history that makes them kind of very specifically who they are. But out of that comes a kind of behavior that causes the bad behavior, if that makes sense. So I was thinking about a book that I just recently read, Big Swiss by Jen Beagin. Do you guys know that book? It's about a woman who transcribes cases for a sex therapist, a local sex therapist, and she becomes obsessed with this woman that she calls Big Swiss. And Big Swiss is a gynecologist who hasn't had an orgasm in her entire life. And then the main character, her mother committed suicide. And so she has all of this unreconciled trauma that she's dealing with. And so where she places it is in with this obsession with this woman who also was physically assaulted and beaten almost to death. So it's a comedy, believe it or not, a dark comedy. It's very, very funny. But she ends up being very manipulative and a liar and deceitful, and she gives Big Swiss a fake name, and all of this is happening they have an affair. So they're together, and yet Big Swiss has no idea really who this woman is, and that she's been listening in on her cases. She knows everything about her because she's been transcribing the cases. And so that is someone who's doing something really, really terrible, kind of having this deeply, deeply deceitful relationship, but it's because she's dealing with her unprocessed trauma. And you don't want to like a liar and a faker like that, but you do like this character. So I think like that when I'm writing people, if they're racist, there's something about them that's like a human in there, and you have to figure out that. Or if they're misogynist, there's all these things I'm thinking about. That's like, these people have to be human. They can't just be like villains, like rubbing their palms together. Like, they have to be kind of real folks.
I think that's the very important thing. They have to be human, and you know the past of these women, and so you can, or in this book, we know the past of these women, and so we see them as total people. And Dylan, that's much the same, I think, in this new book, this new collection of yours. These characters are bad, they do bad things, but we understand them. Like the father in the very first story, the nanny is terrible, and yet the kid is not so great either. It's complicated. It's a total picture.
Right. I've written 3 books about the same group of people, all centering around a girl named Rainey Royal who comes of age in the 70s and matures into the 80s. And she does some things that are pretty bad, and people often talk to me about her as if she's bad. She has committed an armed robbery, she has committed arson, she has affairs with married men that she initiates, and to her the world is a big red, delicious apple, and it's hers to bite into. And you could say that she was kind of raised by wolves. And in fact, one of the things that triggers one of these events is that she overhears someone actually saying that. And she's enraged. But I also felt like in this newest book that I needed to take a look at those wolves. And because it's true, everybody is a human being and nobody thinks of themselves as the villain. And so who are these people? What were formative moments in their lives that began to make the plant grow, bend away from the sun, so to speak. And I did that. I found one of the formative moments in her father's childhood, and I worked really hard at getting inside the mind of the guy who abused her when she was a young teenager, who was her father's best friend. That was hard, but many people have said, you have to have compassion for all your characters, and everybody has humanity, even if they've done their best to quench it. So that's how I approach it.
Yeah, and it's great because it is so complicated. We don't see any of your characters one way. We see them many ways, which is really great. Same is sort of true for you, Janet. You've got some great bad guys. From White Oleander, the mother who you feel so much for, but yet she's not good. She was a terrible mother, all the way up through the Russian novels with the politics, but also, what's his name, Arkady?
Yeah, we've got all
kinds of bad guys.
All kinds of bad guys. The thing to remember is nobody is a bad guy to themselves. Every bad guy thinks he has a reason, or her, thinks she's justified in what she's doing. The way she was treated, or the way, she refuses to be treated, or, they, from their own point of view, it's perfectly justified. The thing about an antagonist in your, is an antagonist does a lot of work for you as a novelist. It's, they keep things from settling down. They keep people from, getting a little huggy and then it's done. To have someone who's a disruptor, and that's what the devil is, of course, to have a disruptor in there makes your job so much easier. But also, we were talking about the humanity of your antagonists, villains, bad guys, all a little bit different. But say in my Russian novels, the Revolution of Marina M and Chimes of the Lost Cathedral is the Russian Revolution. And there are 3 major antagonists. One is a disruptor, the guy that she can't stay away from. And he just sees himself as a citizen of a country of one. You know, he just completely amoral. It's like what I want, and, you know, world's not going to give it to me if I don't take it. One is a crime boss, so a truly terrifying person. And one is the protagonist, one of her two best friends, who becomes joins the party and becomes a member of the secret police of the Cheka for ideological reasons. You know, she doesn't decide, I want to go and kill people. She puts her bets on the idea of the communist revolution and justifies what she's doing because she believes in an ideal world. And my character, you know, she kind of goes along with her to begin with, but she's more of, she realizes that there's what you believe, but then there's what happens, and starting to see the difference. And not being an ideologue, she's able to see, oh, wait a second, this is not what I signed up for. As opposed to her friend who's just like, it's not done yet, it's not done yet, it's not done yet. So you can have different kinds of antagonists who really move the story along.
Yes, and you know, you were talking about plot and how horrible it is, but I think, as Janet was saying, an antagonist will help you with plot. It is something for your protagonist to fight against or respond to or see. And I know I sometimes try to throw in something bad, a bad person that just meets them, you know, on the road. It's like, yeah.
It gets complex because sometimes a good person will totally screw you up, like Dana was saying. And a bad person can do you a good turn for their own reasons. Like they don't really care that they're helping you, but there's some reason that they're helping you. So life is very complex.
Charles Baxter finds that concept that Janet said of a disruptor so important that he has a name for that kind of character. He calls them Captain Happen. And he says, you must have a Captain Happen in your fiction.
Well, who could be more Captain Happen than the devil? But you have other bad guys in there as well, and in interesting ways. And I think what's also interesting is that the bad guy, the antagonist, however they are, illuminates the protagonist's own flaws somehow, it seems. They either fall under the spell of the devil, or they justify themselves because of the bad that's been done to them, or they follow blindly. And we're going, don't do it, leave your friend. But they do it because of who they are. And so that antagonist helps us define our protagonist in that way. I don't know, anybody want to jump in?
Yeah, I love that because it is true. Like it's such a helpful thing for you to have for plot and for conflict and for problems that you have to deal with. But also at the same time, it's just very interesting. You know, it's not just one of those like only for the plot situations, right? Like, and I think something that, you know, came up a lot of times here is the complexity of the villainy and the villain. It's something that is so fun and interesting to think about. And you can do that through their actions and how your character reacts to it. So yes, it's a great mirror, like a distorted mirror to their flaws. Another thing that I think very it was very relevant to this devil book that I wrote, is just because I was thinking so much about demonization, right? Like, and when we make complex villains that do horrible things, it doesn't mean that you have to approve of that thing whatsoever. But I think adding complexity to bad actions, it's so important, because if you think of a lot of the mass propaganda stuff that happens, the villains and the bad is very simple. Anytime you see a bad that is very simple, you're being played with, right? So I feel like having a gradation and a complexity in villainy is so interesting as well as helpful. So it's just a double. It just keeps on giving. Yeah.
I was thinking about, because you had mentioned, Diana, about some of my characters making bad choices. And I was thinking about, in my novel, Elsewhere, California, there's a chapter where the character Avery goes to spring break, and she goes to spring break with these sorority girls who are white sorority girls, and she's at a mostly white university, which happens to be USC. And in 1985, thereabouts, and they're her friends and they hang out with her, but they keep saying to her, yeah, when we get to Palm Springs, we're gonna find some black dudes for you, like, you know, you're really pretty for a black girl, so we gotta find you a black guy. And that doesn't sit well with Avery, because she feels like dehumanized by these people and categorized in a way, and put in these very strict categories. So what does she do? She makes a mistake based on what these like sort of subtle antagonistic sorority girls say, which is that this is your corner, you stay in it, this is your world. So what she do? She gets to Palm Springs, and she's just kind of like, she gives a sexual favor to a young man at the pool just to prove a point, and he's not a black man. And so that's one of those things when you're reading, you're just like, honey, no. Like, why are you doing that? But it's like, because she feels some type of way about how she's being treated and seen, that she does a thing like, I'll show you. But as a reader, you're like, you don't need to show me that. Like, but it's messy. And that's what I like, that kind of mess where you're feeling for the character, you're seeing they're making a mistake, but you know why they're making the mistake, because this thing happened here, and it's messy. So that's what I like about it.
Can I say something about Honey No? That's great. I think you need to put a Post-it above your computer that says Honey No. I have a Post-it above my desk, or I had it for years until another writer took it, that said, how can I fuck this up? Which means bring in Captain Happen. Every scene has to have tension in it or conflict, and you can't have that if you're stroking the cat's fur the right way and the cat is purring. You know, you got to run the brush the other way. There's got to be tension, or we look away. We walk somewhere else. We put the book down, or as Janet says, you know, tell me where you would put my manuscript down and go get a sandwich, because that's a problem for me in that part of the manuscript. And yeah, honey, no. Or you can use wine, either one.
And I think the other interesting thing that you've both brought up here is that there are these intangible evils. They're sort of intangible, like racism, like place, right? Like going on spring break with a lot of white girls is a bad thing. It's a protagonist of a sort all by itself. Like we were talking about in the previous panel, Chris was talking about that heat. That heat can be a Captain Happen, you know, because it makes people do things, right? So there are lots of ways you can explore evil and bad guys and, jealousy. There's something for a completely average character. Suddenly they're crazy because partner went, and flirted with someone else. So I think there are lots of ways to explore evil and bad guys and that uncomfortableness that propels our stories forward. And all four of these writers do that very well.
Something about the creation of evil, bad characters, difficult, is that one of the things about being human is that you are all things. You get to a certain point. You have all of these different aspects in you. And fiction is sort of like a dream where everyone in the dream is you. Anybody see a shrink ever? No. Everyone in the dream is you. So you can take parts of yourself and give them to different characters. So say in White Oleander, I took like all of my artistic selfishness. It's like, what if I was all my artistic selfishness, just get out of my way, leave me alone, let me do my thing. What would happen? What kind of a character? That's Ingrid, the mother and the antagonist of the book. What if I was all my vulnerability? I became that. I gave that to another character who ended up a suicide. You can part out parts of yourself. So you're wondering, like, why are these wonderful women writing these, difficult characters? There's part there. It's in there. Like, we don't use it in real life. People are always, if you write dark stuff, people come up to you and go, "Oh, but you're such a nice person." It's like, yes and no.
My aunt said to me, my 92-year-old aunt said to me, "I'm so proud of you, but why do you write these books like this? Can't you write something happy?" So, yeah, it's true. They just don't want us to be who we are. But we are those people, and always my worst characters are usually my favorites, because you have to work really hard on them to figure out why they are the way they are and who they are. And also because even though they are your dark self, they're the self you push away. So then you have to pull it in to write about it. Yeah, exactly. So any last thoughts? Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I was just going to say, I love this. And I think we talked a lot about complexity and this kind of thing and compassion. And I think putting yourself and using your vulnerabilities, the villains can be complex and interesting and multidimensional, but they can be also very funny and very fun, right? You can have like good laughs. Or for me, for example, I'm a very scared person, and I don't break any rules. Okay, because like me and my husband, we go places. If it says like no trespassing, I'm not gonna, So I write these characters like I'm writing a boss lady that does outrageous things right now, and I laugh. I find her so funny. She does all the things that I imagine doing and would not do. So you can use the stuff that is you can use this stuff that you can't do, but you might, so they can be very funny as well.
So questions, do you have, there's one in the way back.
Hi. You guys have talked about how nobody's the villain to themselves, or nobody's, but I think there are also we've all kind of had real moments of clarity where you're like, oh shit, maybe I am. And I'm writing a character who is a bad guy and very much wants to get better and kind of keeps getting in his own way. And I found that I think I spent so much time trying to empathize with his badness and understand it that I'm struggling to make him change. And so I'm wondering if any of you have ever had characters who, are bad or started out bad and then have changed in some way, and how you kind of did that and handled that, because I'm finding it almost more difficult than the original badness, is that sort of nebulous space of someone who genuinely does want to be good but doesn't know how, almost.
That's such a great question. I feel like when you were saying this, I was thinking of two, like badness. One thing that I think about a lot is the opposite of that. What you said, both of them exist, which is like it's so difficult for people to actually see the big stuff. Like these guys, they're doing outrageous things out there. We as a population think, oh, they're gonna go to prison. They're gonna regret this. I'm like, wow, maybe they'll never ever regret this and never feel bad about any of it, right? It's kind of very frustrating as a human. But the other side is there's so many behaviors which you brought back, and it's usually when people have a good intention, right? It's not the big, huge stuff. But what I think about that, if I were looking into this, I would look at things like people who write addiction, stuff that is very difficult. Even like I even thought of vampires, you know. So this is a different type of badness, right? Like it's like you feel guilty, but you can't stop doing it. So I think I would look a lot at addiction and people who have had, like some of the characters that we talked about here, who had trauma in their lives, especially parents who are not trying not to do the thing to their children that happened to their thing. So I think there's certain type of like these things, they sort of are recurring problems like that. So these are the kind of characters I would look at to deal with that.
Also, I would say don't look for a smooth development, that it should be back and forth. Like instead of I'm not sure, it's like I think this, or you know, that I'm trying to get over that, but that guy really dissed me, and he just can't go on like that. These, you know, have that chain, have them go back and forth rather than a smooth change.
If you take a look at Jesus' Son by Dennis Johnson, it's maybe 100 pages long, and the primary character is an addict named Fuckhead who just bumbles through these 11 stories, leaving, you know, death and just destruction in his wake. At the end, last story, he actually is on the upswing. He's working in an old folks' home, and you have a sense of hope, but he's not there yet. And you might take a look at that. There's a really beautiful actual moment of epiphany in that story.
And just to piggyback what Dylan said, I love stories that you feel like there's an opportunity for change. It's open-ended. It's not like, and then I saw the light and I was changed. It's more like I'm feeling something or noticing something. There's a kind of gesture or an observation. Something happens in the story that speaks to a kind of opening up and a consideration of change rather than change itself. To me, those I like those stories.
We started talking about this in workshop today, as a matter of fact. I think it's more important that your character be interesting than likable. You know, you don't have to like them, but they have to be interesting in their way so that the reader wants to continue seeing them. I think that's more important than likability. I don't think we need to like everybody in a story. We'll like them from time to time, dislike them sometimes, but you have to just be engaged with them.
And I agree. I think, like Dana was saying, it has to sort of ebb and flow. You know, nobody's likable all the time. You know, we get tired of our partners. We get tired of whatever. They piss us off. So it's okay to embrace that. It makes them interesting to be shitheads sometimes. So,
yes, and I think I know what you're, I understand completely. And I have had like friends talk about books and I'm like, no, but this is supposed to be this is not a mistake, you know what I mean? But it's very hard to navigate what's going around at all times. You know, it's hard. I do think that the best you can do, it is worry. Like you worry, right? Like, am I doing the right thing or whatever? I do think that for everything you write, including the unlikable characters, just be very truthful, be very honest, think about it. Like write how you write, and then in revision, think about, okay, what is this saying about the outer world? It doesn't mean you have to cater to a particular thing. Just be aware of what's happening with your villain or if you're an unlikable character. Once you're very aware and you're careful, then it is what it is, you know? Whatever crisis in literacy or whatever you read in the headlines, right? This is happening, but for me, it's like, no, I'm gonna do good work. I'm gonna be reflective, but I'm gonna do what I'm gonna do, respectfully, Yeah.
So there was a question on the aisle on this side. Okay, over here somewhere. Oh, yes, Zach.
One of the things I struggle with when I'm trying to write a bad character or a villain is we're talking about complexity, we're talking about characters having trauma, or having kind of antecedents that are what caused them to act a certain way. But one of the things I struggle with is drawing too straight of lines, just to like make a, kind of exaggerate. Like, let's say you have a guy who's beaten by his father, so he beats his kids, right? That's too straight of a line almost. Like, it's just too on the nose. How do you kind of approach trying to think at right angles with how trauma or those kind of earlier events would lead to the villain's actions in believable ways that are like the reader might not think right away, like, okay, that's not where I would have gone, but it makes sense as soon as they read it. Like, how do you approach that?
I'm not a great lover of flashback. That's my personal bias. It's not like I walk around telling writers, don't do flashback. But I think you can sometimes do things with one little brushstroke. When I was a kid, if I misbehaved, ... or M dash. That's it. There's your whole history.
I love Flashback Dylan. I love it so much. It's like my favorite thing. But I'm also a fan of the brushstroke. I always say, we don't have to like beat things endlessly. But I was thinking about your specific example. I watch a lot of true crime, and I was watching these parents' daughter basically murdered a bunch of people, like crashed a car purposefully. Everybody in the car died. They were so permissive. They never corrected her, they let her run amok. And then when she killed people, they just were kind of like, she's a really good kid. And like as an audience person, I'm just like, what? So it's that thing of like, what if these were the parents that were like, they had parents that beat them endlessly, and they were like, when we have kids, we're gonna let them do what they wanna do. And as a result, they're the worst parents ever, with no self-examination, no thought. Like that to me is almost just as bad as the person who causes physical violence, where you're not taking any accountability for the way in which you raised this person who murdered people without regret herself. Like it's a mess. And that's something where instead of being like, oh, when I was little, my parents beat me and it's more like they did the opposite and that was just as bad. And how do you write that interestingly?
And sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just a very quick, I have like two parts for this thing. I feel like one part is being, for not only this, but anything that is like like you said, it's like a straight line. Am I engineering? Don't engineer, right? You're not saying A because of B. For me, the solution to that is to notice yourself doing it and go, no, 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 and get into the character. You have to live the character. You're not explaining to somebody, right? You're living the character. So it's good that you're thinking about that, because then you notice it and you're like, no, let me take a break, recenter. I'm not explaining this to a reader, right? I'm living the character. So I think that helps a lot. The second related thing is things have many causes, right? Like in reality, but you're not thinking about them all the time, and you're not putting them on the page. So if you follow the consciousness, that is going to allow you to give part of that reason, but let it open that there might be other stuff, because you're just following what your character is thinking, right?
I don't.
So that's the dislike and the like of flashback.
I don't
please.
dislike them. I think I love reading them when they're well done and they're in scene, and I've written them as separate scenes, because I'm not great at weaving them into a scene. It's just my personal thing. So I rely heavily on that brushstroke approach, where I just with a watercolor brush will try to weave it in a little. And then if I have to do it, I make it, and this is just me, because I think other writers do it great, and I envy that. I'll do a whole separate scene, so it becomes part of the structure. Now, space break, then space break. Now, almost like I'm braiding them. It's just not something that's my particular gift. But if you read me, you'll see that, yeah, I do it. I think it's often essential, and I do study how other writers pull it off.
And I see why. I feel like, because sometimes a flashback really just slows down everything, right? It's like, this amazing thing's happening, let me stop the story and give you like 3 pages of this person's history, and that's annoying. Like, so when it's done that way, it feels like it's getting in the way of the story. But why I like them is, you can get a lot of context in a flashback, which can be a fully rendered flashback, or a summarized scene as a flashback, or a flashback through dialogue, where someone's like, remember that time, we got busted by the cops, and then we did this. That's kind of a flashback. So there's like, flashbacks have a lot of different shapes and a lot of different lengths and a lot of different intentions. So, but I like them. And in my first collection, I did a flashback within a flashback within a flashback, which I didn't even know I was doing. And somebody read that and they were like, that was the worst. Why did you do that? Like, I hated that. And I was like, it felt right. Like, I felt like, and it was a weird thing. But I like them because I feel like you can get a lot of information in, again, but like, you have to be very careful about how you're doing it, how long it is, like at what cost is this flashback suddenly in my story or novel? Like, you have to think about it.
Yeah, I work associationally. So I think in a dialogue scene, say somebody will see something, hear something, there is no time in the psychological. You can stop time, insert something that somebody remembers, and then the waitress comes by, so you want some more coffee, and it's like you're right back where you were. So it doesn't have to be page after page. It just, I do that all the time. I mean, just my own mental processes. A smell will bring something back, a tune on the jukebox, a cigarette, and it doesn't take away. You just can't let it take away from the present scene.
Just like a master at this is Mary Gateskill. So if you read like Veronica, it takes place all in one day, but it then covers her whole, like, the character's modeling career, her friend who dies of AIDS in New York in the 80s. It's like this whole history of the past that comes up as this woman lives her life during, it's amazing. So.
And I feel like you have to only use them when you have to use them. If we can get that information in another way, in scene, in the present moment, just that brushstroke, a memory, but a memory. And we don't always have to go all the way back to the past and see what happened. And sometimes it's okay for the reader to be left wondering, how bad was that? What happened there? I think it's all right to leave us a little bit out of kilter.
But he's interesting. That's why you go with Humbert Humbert. He's seductive, and he's seducing the reader into his point of view. He's a very interesting character. I think, when you're going to deal with a sociopath, you have to figure out who you want. Do you want this to be a point of view character? Do you want it to be antagonist? Or do you want to have him as the protagonist, seducing the reader along with them, and the reader is struggling throughout not to be seduced and then being seduced?
Yeah, I love that question, because this is the kind of question that I sit like when I'm just wondering and I think about that. I'm like, how would you do it? I feel like there's some fictional psychopath adjacent to sociopath for real in fiction. And I think they are different in reality, in non-fiction and fiction a little bit, because the stuff they did is real and you have to deal with all of that, right? There's a David Mitchell sociopath. I don't remember which book. But he was very good. And I would just bring also, like, just as a counterpoint, like Richard III, which can be just hilarious, right? Like, but these are different because they are fictional, even though it's a real person. I think there's a challenge there, especially with figures like that with a point of view, because a lot of times in fiction, they make them funny, they make them interesting, they make them almost not 100% sociopathic. So they do all these other routes that maybe is not completely available there, depending on who you're doing. So I think exploring those, but also playing like in and out of the point of view, I think it's a very interesting challenge, and ripe for a lot of experimentation and search, but it's not easy.
One of the books you might take a look at is No Country for Old Men. Yeah. Not the movie. It's worth reading the book, because Anton Chigurh is totally a sociopath, but he is fucking riveting. He represents something. It might be the devil. It might be fate or destiny. But he's unstoppable as a force. And yet this man has convictions about things, and they are fascinating and terrifying. And he affects certain people very deeply, emotionally, before he kills them or doesn't kill them. I think about him so much. I've read that book so many times. I don't even love the book. It's not my favorite Cormac McCarthy. And yet I have to read the principles in that book periodically.
And on that happy note, I think we're done. Thank you so much.
great. I want to thank our panelists, and I'm going to give you some directions about where you might go now. You don't have to go anywhere, but if you are in the adaptation class, you must get yourself to the Palisades at the other end of the village if you are in the adaptation class. If you are in Sam Friedman's book proposal class, you don't have far to go. Bar 1, right here. Sam is waiting for you. If you are interested in open workshop, you need to find your way to the Pocket Bar. I think that's all our options. Okay, speaking of sociopath, Jean Guerrero's Hate Monger, a portrait of Stephen Miller. Yes. Yeah, oh my gosh. All nonfiction, all true. We're living it.